Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here. My name is Sarah Gardner. I work for CenterPoint. I'm an instructional designer. We're here to talk about the diagnostics today. I started my work with CenterPoint building and designing and working with teachers to create the diagnostics. So I've been involved since the very beginning, and it's a great set of tools that I think you'll find really useful. So today we're going to take a closer look at the diagnostics. We're going to talk about how do you select the right test. So in my mind, I think about the diagnostic suite of tests, both for ELA and math, as having tools in a toolbox. I am a tool maniac. I love tools. I have tools for everything. Just like I have tools for everything, I don't use every tool for every project that I'm working on. So the diagnostics, there's a lot of tools, but you don't need to use all of them all the time, and not every tool is right for every student. Right, so I'm going to give you all of the information, and I'm going to hopefully lead a discussion about when do you use this tool and when do you not use the tool, right? Because we want to have time. You have lots of tools, a lot of assessment tools, but we also know that we need time to instruct, not just time to test, right? So, and we need to be able to apply the information that we get back after we deliver an assessment to analyze the results and then let that inform our instruction, give time to students to be able to apply what you've taught them, not just test them all the time. So even though I'm an assessment specialist, I really advocate for using as much time as possible on instruction and measure periodically, okay? I've also spent years now with the diagnostic, and I've thought about it a lot. I've talked to a lot of teachers about it and had a lot of rich discussion that hopefully I can share with you of practical ways to integrate this into your daily life so that it becomes a useful tool, not something, oh, it's testing day. We're going to talk about, now I've given the test, what do? I have these score reports, what do they look like, and how do I use that to inform my instruction? What kind of decisions can I make with the results of my diagnostic subtests? And what are some cautions, right? If you give one subtest, let's say the reading comprehension test, I don't think that's a wise decision to have that be the be-all, end-all for a student as far as their ELA decisions, right? It can be one piece of the puzzle if you're making decisions about placement for special services, if you're making decisions about gifted and talented qualification, if you're making decisions about moving students to intervention. It's one piece of information. There are lots of pieces when you're making those kinds of decisions. So what is the content that's measured on the ELA diagnostics? And what kind of item types are you going to see? What type of items are students going to engage with? There are 5 subtests for ELA. Again, not all of them are appropriate for every student every day. The reading comprehension is available for grades 2 through 11, okay? But there's a little bit of a split. It's broken up into 2 categories, basically. There's 2nd grade through 8th grade, and then there's high school. And they have a little bit different makeup. So let me explain that. The reading comprehension for grades 2 through 8, you should be able to complete it within 1 class session. They come in both literary and informational text. The difference is in kindergarten or 2nd grade through 8th grade, it's measuring reading literature or reading information text standards 1, 2, and 3 only. In the high school reading comprehension test, it has all of the standards across the forms at a grade level, all of the standards, well, except for 10. 1 through 9 are measured. So it's got a wider breadth of standards coverage in the high school. So 12 questions. The other thing that's different between in reading comprehension 2 through 8 and high school is that the high school also incorporates reading vocabulary questions. So we've got the standard 4 and language standards 4, 5, and 6, all within the reading comprehension. It's a powerful punch, that reading comprehension test. And for most of the time, that's where you're going to start when you're talking about the diagnostics, okay? Now, because in high school, all of the vocabulary questions are embedded in the reading comprehension, the vocabulary subtest here that's separate is only available 2nd through 8th. So those are the two bookends. Let's talk a little bit about reading fluency. Raise your hand if you've given a running record or a reading record. This should be nothing new, right? The reading fluency test, there's not a whole lot you can do with it, right? Like you're assessing the rate, the accuracy of a student who's reading out loud, right? And we've had different discussions with teachers about, well, we don't read out loud very often. And my students, I always told them, I need to see what's going on as you're reading. So it's a way to find out where your strengths are and and the areas that I can help you with to better understand what you're reading. So the reading fluency has 96 passages altogether. And we'll talk more about that. And it also has an expressiveness rubric. So it's not just about how many words per minute a student reads, but how are they reading? Are they reading like a robot? Are they reading word by word? Are they reading in phrases? Do they have inflection? So all of that is encompassed in the reading fluency test. The decoding subtest, it seems lengthy when I tell people that it's 42 questions, but in some respects, it goes by really quickly. And I'll give you more details about the decoding. The thing for me that's important for teachers to know is that the decoding subtest is grade agnostic. Generally, we think about those foundational skills K through 5, right? And they should have those by the time they move on to middle school and high school. But you really can give the decoding subtest at any grade level. The great thing about the decoding subtest is that it measures 6 domains, all the way up from CVC words to syllabication. So it covers the whole gamut. We'll talk more about that when we get to the decoding subtest. The last thing I want to say about it before we move on, though, is that the directions and the stimulus are recorded so a student can hear that. The only thing that they don't hear for the decoding subtest is the actual answer choices, right? We can't give them that. But we can say, they click on a little triangle, it says directions. Select the picture, select the answer that matches the picture. So it will give them all of that. When you think about decoding subtests, that's kind of the foundation of reading, right? So we don't want to be able to test that. We don't want to test them on their ability to be able to read the directions. We're giving that. We're testing their ability to know sounds, that phonics and phonemic awareness that they're going to need. I saved, in my opinion, the best for last. I love the reader motivation survey. It's broken up in grade bands. So 2nd and 3rd grade has 15 questions on it. And it goes all the way up through 12th grade. And we'll talk lots about the reader motivation survey. But the thing that I love about it is it really gives you, as the teacher, insight. It gives you that qualitative data. How do students feel about reading? How do they perceive reading? What kind of value do they place on reading? It's all of those emotions that could really be a game changer in the classroom. So, in a nutshell, those are the 5 ELA subtests that we're going to talk about. I've given you a lot of this information already. The Reader Motivation Survey has 3 grade bands. They're broken up into ranges because sometimes the questions are worded in a more simple way for kids to understand, and their experiences are different. Here's the first, an example of a question you might see on a Reader Motivation Survey. Knowing how to read well is, and they're taking this by themselves. It's different, it's a different feel than if you were just asking kids in a classroom discussion. Oh, do you think, well, of course they're going to say reading's, well, it's more likely. They're going to say that reading is very important. But they're taking this by themselves. They're answering this and thinking this by themselves. So hopefully you'll get accurate data and they'll be truthful. But if I gave this question to, let's say, a 3rd grader, and I'm learning that they don't value reading, they see it as not important, that might drive some of my decisions that I make instructionally. I love this next question. When you are reading challenging text, what strategies do you use to help make sense of the text? You can select more than one. I'll give you a second to read those options. But think about who had this, and we're going to look at the score report for a Reader Motivation Survey in a little bit. If you had this data just on this one question, and we know that there are 19 questions of this sort on the Reader Motivation Survey, think about your grouping for your reading groups if you do that. Think about how you would shape discussions around literature. Okay, think about SLOs. Think about your learning objectives if you said, oh, okay, 75% of the students in my class, based on my school report, 75% of my kids choose either quit reading or talk to a partner. Another question on the Reader Motivation Survey is, most of my classmates think that I am a blank reader, a good reader, a poor reader. So it's getting at those feelings that can really drive student performance, right? If I think everybody thinks I'm a great reader, think about that kid for a minute. Everybody, I'm a great reader. And then maybe someone who has the same ability, but for whatever reason, they don't think they're a good reader. That's something you can do something about. You can shape that. It's the attitudinal part of it. But there are questions here like, I like to read, and then you can check as many as you want. Lots of different things that I think are beneficial with the Reader Motivation Survey. Most of the subtests have multiple forms. There's only one Reader Motivation Survey, but it can give you a lot of information that could really change what happens in your classroom. Okay, we talked a little bit about reading comprehension. In the whole big scheme of things, I think that the reading comprehension is your gateway assessment, right? So if you're looking at the reading comprehension test, it should take less than 42 minutes to complete. There's only 12 questions on it. At the younger grades, it's only covering standards 1, 2, and 3. When you get your school report back, if a student is 70% or higher, if they scored 70% or higher, they're on track. They're doing what they need to be doing. I would stop testing that student, right? It's only with those students that you have other concerns about. You're the professional. You have the experience. You can make that decision whether you want to continue or not. But this is that toolbox analogy that I was talking about. I have other tools that I could use, but I don't need to with students who are on track. This is your first assessment that you give that's going to inform the decisions that you make afterwards. So they're going to have one of three kinds of questions on the reading comprehension test. They're going to answer an accuracy question that's going to be aligned to standards 2 or 3, and then, or they might get an evidence question that's aligned to standard 1, or they might get both. And I have examples of all three of those. All of those questions on the reading comprehension test are all passage-based, right? They're all evidence gathered from a passage that they're going to read. We talked about this. They're only going to be reading 3 passages, only going to be answering 12 questions. There are multiple forms for all of the grade levels. You're not going to have one that has all very complex text and one that has very low text for complexity. They have a low, a medium, and a high, so that it shouldn't matter which form you're giving to students. Generally, when you go in and you assign a test, the computer is going to randomly pick one. I'm going to show you how you can select one specifically, but if you go in, the computer is going to say, okay, I want to give a 7th grade reading comprehension test for literary text. It's just going to pull from one of the multiple forms at that grade level. So the other thing to kind of keep in mind is it's up to you if you can select on a student level, right? So you don't even have to test your whole class. You could, these 5 kids could be taking a reading comprehension test, and the rest could be receiving instruction, right? It's not an all or nothing. You could have a single student take it. You can go in and you can assign some kids, you can go outside your grade level, above or below. So I have some samples here. This is an accuracy item that is on a 2nd grade test, measuring standard 1. Student chooses one of 4 choices. So this is an accuracy item. This is an evidence item. So you'll see that we gave them the reference, like this is where this section comes from, so they can go back to the text quickly and find the portion of the text that we're talking about. Sometimes it has a phrase, sometimes it has the whole sentence, sometimes it'll refer back to an entire paragraph. Some of the questions ask about the whole, some of them ask about the parts. So you get a lot of information with these questions. They see the passage on the left, and they see the questions on the right. This is one of those that asks both accuracy and evidence. And you'll see these answers up here are circles. That means that the students only select one. These down here, but they're square. That means that the student has to select more than one answer, but we don't expect them to know that. We say it here in the directions, which 2 details. So we tell them how many answers they need to select. There's no guessing on that part. There might be guessing about what's the right answer, but not how many they need to choose. The decoding subtest. There are 6 domains that are measured on the decoding. It's mostly for those younger elementary grade teachers that really are still working on the digraphs, that are still working on prefixes and suffixes. Okay, not that there's not occasion for the upper grade teachers to use it, but predominantly it's in that 2nd through 4th grade that do that. It's designed to measure both phonics and phonemic awareness. Everything from CVC words like cat. Select the word that matches the picture, and we'd show them a picture of a cat, and there would be 3 answer choices for them. I'm going to show you an example in just a minute of one of the harder ones, decoding questions that we have. You have to think carefully about this. I especially think about this from like a 2nd or a 3rd grader's point of view, right? Select the word in which the C has the same sound as the C in city. We know there's those impulsive students that are going to go, sack, that's it. right? But you have to actually, oh, look, the next word has a C in it. But you have to really understand the question. The student needs to be able to go all the way down. There are 42 decoding questions, which seems like a lot, but keep in mind the directions and the stimulus are read to them. So the cognitive demand is on answering the question, not on deciphering the directions. Highly recommend you have earbuds for this, because there's a lot of talking going on in the decoding test, right? All the directions, all the pictures are being read. If you had a whole classroom doing this, it would be very loud. And for some kids, it would really impact their ability to answer the questions. It is the only ELA subtest that's adaptive, which means within each of those 6 domains, there's a progression of difficulty. It's still going to measure all 6 categories, but there are some CVC words, for example, that are easier and harder. Some inflectional endings that are easier and harder. So they're going to get a range of complexity within each of the domains. Okay, in its format, the reading vocabulary subtest is very similar to the reading comprehension. We've talked about that already. We know that the reading vocabulary is folded into the high school reading comprehension test. So the reading vocabulary subtest is for 2nd through 8th grade. Now, if you were a 9th grade teacher, you still have access to this. You could still assign this a below grade level reading vocabulary. You have access to all of it. So know that it's there if you needed to. It's because they can read it. Does it mean that they understand what that vocabulary is? It's measuring standard 4, whether that's RI or RL, and language standard 4, 5, and 6. Again, let's go back to those second language learning students. Those language standards, 4, 5, and 6, some of them talk about similes, metaphors. Those are hard for some second language students. So being able to use those context clues to comprehend what you're reading, if you think vocabulary may be a reason why a student is not performing the way that you think they should, this is a great subtest to give them. Has 24 items. Again, there's more because now we've identified that there might be a problem here. I want to gather as much information as I can. Here's an example. I'll give you a second to read it. Obviously, this is one of the higher grades. I think it's actually off an 8th grade test. But looking at why an author chooses a particular word, does that impact the meaning? Does it impact the tone? What's the purpose? There are nuances that get at that critical reading, that close reading. I don't want to say this is the least innovative, I guess, subtest that we have. If you're an elementary school teacher, you know what reading records are, or running records. They call them different things in different places. How many words correct per minute? What kind of self-corrections do students insert a word? Do they omit a word? Can they tell you a retelling of what they just read? There are some advantages for the reading fluency subtest. I think the biggest one is that there are so many. There are 96 reading fluency passages in a range from 2nd grade, we say 8+, because you could still need these in middle school and high school. There are more of them at the younger grades. They're both informational and literary text. They're all about the same within a grade level. They're all about the same complexity, and they're all 250 words. You can print them out there they're PDFs, so you can print them out, give one to the student, keep one for yourself. You know how to do it. Make your check marks, make your lines, do the self-correct, omit, all of that directions. If you're a new teacher or maybe you're moving from an upper grade to a lower grade, all of that information is in the subtest if you need it. But for those veteran teachers who have given so many reading fluency tests, you may not need it. The thing that's different, that you give the student their copy of the passage and give them a few minutes to read over it to themselves, right? Practice it by themselves. For some kids, that's a game changer, right? If you had it face down and all of a sudden you flipped it over, the anxiety is already higher than it needs to be. Most of us would appreciate that same courtesy of, give me a minute. Let me just look at it. They can run through it in their mind. So give them a couple minutes, 2-3 minutes to practice it. And then, all right, now you're going to read that out loud to me. So you're keeping track of how many words they read correct, how many mistakes that they made. The formula is all there on the sheet. So every school and school districts is a little bit different. If you've identified a student that has reading fluency issues, the good news is there are lots of passages to accomplish that. So many, in fact. I've had teachers tell me that they have enough where they can actually use some for instruction, right? Hey, today we're going to talk about what does it look like to read fluently? And you can do those talk alouds as you're instructing. I'm coming up on a word, I'm not sure what it is. I'm going to look at the picture, I'm going to think about the story, I'm going to say the beginning sound, I'm going to read on to the end of the sentence, I'm going to, you can talk them through all of those strategies. The other thing that I think is really powerful that goes hand in hand with the reading fluency is this expressiveness rubric, right? It was developed by NAEP. So it gives you, and you'll get used to looking at this rubric over time. It looks like a lot of words right now. Of course, you're aiming for a 4. They're looking at it more holistically when they're reading, right? They are changing the tone of their voice. They're reading in phrases rather than word by word. The more choppy it is, the comprehension level typically goes down. The other thing about reading fluency is that we have literary passages and we have informational passages too. And I really want to reiterate this. I've said it multiple times. You have access to a lot of assessments. You don't need to use them all. Use them where it's warranted, where it's going to help inform your instruction. This is definitely not all students for all subtests. It's unnecessary. We have them all, but you don't need to use them all. A student scored a 50% on the grade level reading comprehension test. The teacher thought it might be reading fluency. So they assigned the reading fluency test, and the student scored 90 words per minute with an expressiveness of 2. Now what do? Right? So these are the decisions that you're going to have to make. You're going to be gathering information. What do you do with it? If you don't do anything with it, it's a waste of time. You've wasted your time and you've wasted instruction time, you've wasted that student's time. You have to do something with the information that you collect. So these are all the same, these 3 groups. There aren't hard right answers or wrong answers.